And we're back.
Welcome to No Direction Beyond, your home for Starfinder's news, reviews, and interviews. I'm Alexander Agunis, No Direction's everyman gamer, and I'm joined, as always, by the most intrepid Starfinder this side of the galaxy, James Ballard.
I used to write Code Switch.
And today we're also joined by two members of the Starfinder creative team because unless you've been under I don't know, a space rock or something, an asteroid, you've probably heard that there's a new Starfinder looming on the horizon of the vast for everybody. Well, I'm going to stop with all these puns, but we're here with Jenny Jarzabski. Oh my God, I hope I said it right.
You said it right.
I did it. Yeah, I practiced.
Yay.
Literally, I was like, throw questions together, spend a week making sure I don't make a fool of myself on this stream. And oh, hi, Thurston.
Oh, hi. Yeah. I'm just the eye candy here. What can I say?
Well, it's wonderful to have you both on the show. It's been a while. Jenny and I were talking about it during the pre-show, and like I don't think we've had Jenny on here since like Dustin was like a member of us and not a member of you.
Yeah, it's been like 2 years.
Yeah.
Easily. So
Time is an illusion, as you'll soon find out as this product gets closer to shipping. Well, we thank you so much for being on No Direction Beyond. We talked a lot about the first field test, which came out almost a month ago now. Is that right?
Yeah.
Almost a month?
Yeah, wow.
That sounds
Time
right.
really is an illusion. Yes.
Yeah.
Just a bit over a month ago. Yeah, because it's like early August. Yeah.
So what's the reaction to the field test been for both of you? Are you excited, scared, nervous, surprised?
Oh, just like super positive. Like everywhere that I've kind of gone has just been like really positive vibes. People seem to be really excited where we're taking the game, sort of are happy with the open playtest side of things and sort of that approach. Like it's just been really cool. And like, people are tearing it apart, but when some people tear things apart, like I haven't had someone who's been doing it in a bad way. Like everyone's been like really good about like their analysis, and in many cases it was funny because some of the things people hyperanalyzed we'd already changed by the time that field test was out. So
it's funny like that, but at least then that gives you the feedback that like that decision was the correct one.
Absolutely.
Or I mean, unless the hyperanalysis was useless, then I don't know, shrug. But it can be both. So what's it like running a playtest essentially 2 years in advance? Paizo's never had a playtest with this amount of like needed, correct?
Well, we're like clarifying, we're not running a play test here, right? Like these field tests are not a play test. They are
turbo alpha.
They're like, hey, look at the cool stuff we're doing. That's kind of what this is. Like if you have some like big concerns, feel free to bring them up. Like we appreciate that. As I said, we certainly look at it. But it's a chance for us to get ideas out there, but we don't have a play test for, oh gosh, just under a year. So like the full playtest process is coming, but like this process is something very different. I think I wouldn't even call it a playtest because we're not giving you all the things you need to do a proper playtest with it.
Yeah, it's actually really funny that you say that, because like I've seen in like different Pathfinder 2e things, I've seen people like play testing the new exemplar and animus with like soldiers in the party. So it's like, oh, I guess you're playing level 5 or lower then.
yeah, I've seen that too. And I think like some people are doing their best to play games with the soldier and like throw the guns in. And that's great because, we're fine with that. We want you to do that. But obviously, we're going to give you a more robust play test with full rules down the road. That's what we really want that like working feedback on. This is just more, here's what we're thinking. Here's gauging initial reactions and just getting the community talking about it, basically.
And the community definitely is talking about it. We've been talking about it since our last episode, and so we have some questions that people have responded to with hashtag God, what I say was beyond questions, I think is what I linked in our chat. So we have a few from those. James and I have some questions to round it out, and we also have a live audience. Wow, we're at 15. Nice. I'm excited because usually most of our listeners are people who listen to the show after the fact on the RSS feed. So seeing this many people come out, thank you so much. We appreciate you. If you have questions you would like Thurston or Jenny to answer, feel free to throw them into the stream chat. I can't promise you we'll answer all of them, but at the very least, Jenny and Thurston will see them. And that's all
True.
I can promise you. I guess we should not stick around and wait for too long, huh, James? We should start throwing questions.
Yeah, how about you start us off?
Oh no. All right. Why don't we start with one of our listener questions? Milo V asked in our chat, there's a lot of questions about specific classes. Is that off the menu?
So we will talk broadly about some classes. We're not going to deep dive classes we haven't even shown a field test
Yeah,
for.
totally. Makes sense.
You know, we've certainly done some of our field report blogs where we've talked about playtests and people have gleaned some stuff. But again, that is all subject to change. It might not even be a current rendition of where we're at. So I don't want to entertain too much of like would bees, could bees, maybe bees.
Okay. Then
This
then
isn't the
maybe
bee movie.
that's fair. Oh my god, that movie. Maybe then we can focus those questions around like a description or a more of a like details on like some of the field test reports then. Or however you want to do it. You guys decide. Dun dun dun. So
You can
the
ask the
Wants us to talk
questions
about
and
my
we'll just
favorite
be
comic. Do it
like,
now.
yeah.
So Milo V had two questions. One was about the operative, the one was about the mystic. For the operative, the question was that the field test makes it sound very single shot focused because of the aim action. He was wondering whether that was as a feature of the operative, like, am I going to need to aim to do pretty much everything? Or do you see it as something more like a support option? Like, are we going to see the old triple attack, quad attack build from first edition?
Well, you know, that is certainly the aim action and the application of it in the field test, like play test that I know
Yeah.
Milo's referring to, was from one type of build, which was a sniper type build, which anyone who's played Starfinder First Edition knows was a type of build that was not obvious on how you actually built it. And so we wanted that to be on the tin. So that's that type of build. The operative, however, as a class, has other types of builds. And I can tell you from some of our other playtests that no, one shot, one kill is not the be all end all of the class. The aim action that's mentioned there has some other things to it.
So you're telling me I can Widowmaker though? That was basically a Widowmaker report. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely.
That was in that report. I think it was like 40 plus damage in one shot. You know,
That was that your character or
Wow.
Jessica's, Jenny?
That was Jessica's character.
Oh,
Yeah.
Did
She was the sniper in that playtest.
Did she say one shot, one kill? Like you got to quote it, right? It's like isn't that a requirement? Kind of
I
like
don't think-
how.
Yeah, I don't think she said that, but she had some other like edgy one-liners for her sniper, if I recall correctly.
Several.
That's good.
Yes.
Now you just need Dustin to play test one and have him shout Japanese Hanzo quotes the entire time.
Oh my god. Oh, Hanzo.
Yeah. The other question that Milo had was about the Mystic. He pointed out the Mystic's well known for having psychic powers in first edition, and there's been some murmurings about how it's now a divine / nature spell this class. So, like, what's the plan with all the psychic stuff? Is it gone? Is it being added in other places? Is that still part of the design team's like concept for what a Mystic is?
The psychic-y type things that I think people like about the Mystic are currently, you know, on the docket. I'll say that. But as far as like, is it an occult class? Well, one thing we did when we were looking at all of the classes in our game was like, okay, what do they currently do? What can they do? How can we analyze this? Gosh, my hand's like disappearing. Thanks, auto correct.
Eating your nose.
I know. Anyway,
It's the Devourer.
it is. It's entropy. It's got me. Okay. The thing there, and like Jenny can back me up a bit on this when we were going through it as a team. It's like, wow, there sure was a lot of stuff in Starfinder First Edition that just all fell under a cult, and that would be really boring. Like, if you look at pretty much every spellcaster, because it was all bespoke spell lists, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of them, because there wasn't a ton of room and there wasn't a ton of, you know, opportunity to expand on those spell lists until later, we kind of had to like scrounge between like two piles. With this, we've got a couple different opportunities, and like Mystics, you know, we were wanting to see, you know, where did they fit in our game from a lore perspective. And what makes them different than a cleric, right? Like what we don't want to do is just recreate a class that, like, to a lot of degrees is just very boring. And so, we looked at mystics and we're like, hey, there's some opportunity here with divine and the primal spell list, not nature, I correct you. But those two spell lists are, speak to a lot of things in Starfinder that you commonly associate mystics with. Mystics are sort of the champions of deities and always have been in the setting, but they're also sort of these champions of certain causes that are close to nature. A good example of that is, like, xeno druids are one of those things where we have had them in our setting for forever, and we want to make sure that we're giving opportunities and options for those groups and factions, right?
Yeah, totally. I get you. Murder Hobo 6226 in chat live asks, are you aiming for Starfinder specific subclasses for Pathfinder core classes like the Fighter Wizard? Is that something that's on the table?
Okay.
I think we can.
Yeah,
I think we
Jenny.
can answer right away. Definitely no. I think right away our focus is more on making this a standalone game that is, like, obviously will be compatible, but is fully realized. We want to focus on the Starfinder classes that we're creating and options for those. Oh my God,
See my
you're not
messy
being eaten
room,
anymore.
whatever.
And as for, like, Thirsty, you might be able to speak more to, like, the long-term plans, which again we're still, like, we have some planned material several years out, but we clearly don't know the whole cycle of where everything will go forever, right?
Yeah, totally.
It would make a lot of sense for us in the future to talk to our friends on the Pathfinder side of the wall and be like, hey, we should do a Pathfinder Starfinder book that's like 4 pages of fighter feats meant for Starfinder, 4 pages of ranger feats meant for Starfinder. Here's 2 more pages of ancestry feats for elves that are Starfinder specific, right? Like, there's all these opportunities that present themselves. We just kind of have to get to there, right?
Yeah, definitely. James, do you want to take the next question?
Sure. I have one from Dead Phoenix. So far, field test reports have been completely silent about the Envoy. People hoping for non-magical bard support. What are your plans for the Envoy, and how do you plan to balance the need for a unique class that stands on its own versus a class that could potentially exist as just a 2E class?
Yeah, okay. So first of all, in the, like, you haven't talked about the Envoy. That's because we've only had one field test. So there's a lot of stuff we haven't talked about. So just like clarity on that point, right? But the Envoy is a class we're in the midst of testing. It is doing some things differently. We looked at the Envoy from first edition and what were sort of like people's gripes about it in first edition, and what were unfun play experiences in first edition that we could improve on and really take advantage of some of the 2E engine, as we'll call it. Like, taking advantage of that. I'll say, I think, Jenny, you in our last play test played the Envoy, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. And that was probably a very different experience from envoys you've seen in, like, our 1E games, for example. But without, like, spoilering any mechanics, how would you say that experience felt? Like, I'm curious there.
Yeah, it was really fun because obviously, like, your quippy, like, witty remarks are always free. And of course there's sometimes fun times we can do, fun things we can do mechanically with that in Pathfinder, but also possibly in SF2. But it felt really good because it felt like I could do things that would boost, buff my comrades in some way, but also have enough action. Again, it's like the 3 action economy does so much work here on its own for just being like, I can do a thing that boosts people. I can take a pot shot and then I'm going to dive for cover. Or I'm going to reposition because my face is too pretty to be in the way, but, like, I got you, fam. And it was really fun. Like, it honestly felt like the experience lived up to the fiction of that class, of being like the smooth talker, or like the sassy leader of the party. It was really fun. And it felt like what I wanted. Obviously it's not exactly the same as Starfinder first edition, but there were similarities. It felt like that, but it was just a different experience. But I really liked it.
And I think the one thing I would say about the Envoy is it's standing right now, and again, I don't want to deep dive other classes too much, but one thing that I noticed, and it's always been my bugbear of the Envoy in first edition, is you do your action and you're kind of spending your whole primary resource mechanic to make everyone else awesome. And that is a player, you have to be a specific type of player to find that enjoyable.
Mhm.
And so, when we come out with the enhanced envoy and Starfinder enhanced releasing next month, you're gonna find out that was one of the things we looked at and tweaked, was trying to give more opportunity for like envoys to, I don't know, do a thing and shoot their gun. So taking some of that like design principle and again just lived experience of like our team has played this game. Like Jenny and I have been involved with Starfinder since the start of it as a game in one way or
many,
another.
many moons
So,
ago.
yeah.
Oh gosh.
Are we still going to be able to get him? Got to shout get him. It's a
Oh,
failure if I
yes.
can't shout
Yeah.
get him.
Oh yeah, you'll be
and
able to.
in fact, one of the, again, going back to the action economy things that's been really fun, is it's really fun when, as a reaction, when your get 'em target dies, you can spend a reaction to get 'em someone else
Change of
without
plans.
change of plans. Like, there's so much just fun stuff there. See, I said I wouldn't spoil anything,
And
but
then you
here
did.
I am. And next
Oh
question.
man. Well, it can't be as bad as the time that Ryan and Param accidentally got Eric to spoil like a major release on
I
stream.
know.
So next question then. Let's see. What sort of ways like I think one of the things that I've seen people wondering is sort of like this statement of like, on one hand, people are like, oh, Starfinder 2 is going to be its own game, and other people are like, oh, Starfinder 2 is now a campaign setting for the 3-action system. And I think that like that thought can sort of split and go both ways, because like we've seen campaign settings that have just built off of existing games, like, in a whole bunch of the Wizards of the Coast stuff, but like we've also seen games where it's like, okay, we've added a couple of these new mechanics and it's definitely different. So like, from where you guys are at and with what you're comfortable with sharing, what do you think makes Starfinder 2 its own game and not like derivative off of Pathfinder 2nd edition? Or
Okay.
I don't know if that
There's
makes sense.
Yeah, so like let's get some things out on like cards on the table here, right? Like, in a lot of ways, Starfinder started off as Pathfinder in space. Like,
Mhm.
and let's acknowledge that bugbear in the room, right?
Yeah, sure.
Like, several of the gods are the same. The setting was ripped. This was done in large part because Starfinder was made on a fairly tight timetable. And so this was all things that led to the development of Starfinder, which made it a game that in many ways is, yes, Pathfinder in space in some form or another. Now when I hear people saying like, oh, like Starfinder is going to be an expansion, I can tell you emphatically that is not the case. In fact, in our next field test, like, don't like, I have the line in the intro that is like, this is not an expansion, guys, chill. Because like, Starfinder is a brand, right? It's an important brand to Paizo. It's an important, pillar in our company and what we do. We want to make sure that we're supporting it as well as we can. We don't want to do that abusively. Like, for example, when we do our playtest rulebook, spoiler alert, you're probably going to need to own player core and GM core for Pathfinder 2. But also, all of those rules are available for free online if you want to check them out anyways. But it's again just incredibly presumptive of us to like fill a playtest rule book full of rules that already exist for what is essentially a free playtest. Like, I want to give as much value as we can to people to test out the things that are new and not just us reprinting words, which would be the easier way to do it. But for a playtest, we're getting a specific brand of player anyways, and I hope that they're a bit more invested to check those rules. Yay. But when it comes to the final game, and like, people should not be under any illusions about this. Starfinder 2nd edition will be its own game. It will have its own standalone core rule books. It will have its own standalone support. It's not just going to be, here is like 3 books we've bundled together and that's the end of the product line. That's nowhere near our intent with this.
Cool. Night Trace in chat asks, will switching to a system that's more like Pathfinder 2nd edition lend itself to changes from Pathfinder's core assumptions? Like, are you going to look at the different rarity tags? Like, are like that? I'm sure it's way too early along the process to have a lot of information about that, but like, I guess I think what they're trying to ask is, is it on the table that you could change core rules in that version of the 3-action system for the Starfinder version if you felt like it would be more appropriate for the game that you were creating?
When we say these games are completely compatible, I don't want to pull the rug out from someone. That's very important to me. When we say these games are compatible, I don't want like a 3.0 to 3.5. The grapple rules are totally like the same kind of really, or even, even to a degree, Pathfinder First Edition to Starfinder. Sure, there were rules for converting your PF1 stuff to Starfinder, but no one ever really did them, right? Like it was very rare that people would go through that.
It was harder work than
it
it
was
made it
it was
seem. Yeah.
and we don't want to make changes to the core engine of the game that would undermine that. Like I don't want to change a baseline math assumption, for example, or how, fundamentally how a weapon property works, because that's just going to create dissonance between the games, and that's going to take away from these games being compatible. Now, there are tons of cases where we look at stuff and go, we can improve or make addendums to that. I'll give a good example of this. In Pathfinder 2e, there is an injection trait. So like, in Starfinder, you have injection weapons. I have a stick. I poke someone with a stick full of poison. They take damage. In Pathfinder, when you stick someone with the stick full of poison, you spend an action to then inject the poison, which makes sense. You're taking advantage of your action economy. Yay. We had to put a rule in there that under the injection property that was like, oh, do you shoot a gun with an injection like weapon? You don't have to spend the second action. Don't worry, momentum will do that for you. And those are the types of things where we can expand on and build on some existing architecture. Where the real fun thing and like what makes our game different, and I don't want to say uncompatible or different from like these core rules, is there is a different meta state and how the game exists and plays from like a at the table perspective. That is a core functionality. And then the other one is we're going to have a whole bunch of new bespoke things, new conditions, new spells, new assumptions for certain types of weapons and whatnot. Those will all latch on and be added rules, but they won't be like, to attack with your sword you now roll a d12. That would defeat the purpose of what we're doing.
Definitely. James, do you want to take a question?
Sure. I just have one. How do you design combat to make like guns or other firearms desirable for 9th level casters and magic desirable for lower level casters, like think Maguses?
Oh, yeah. So I think there's a couple things here, and I believe Jenny can like touch on some of these, handling some of our spellcaster. But we have something in our game we call casting gun that has proven to be really effective
cast
for
gun.
spellcasters.
It's a one action that everybody has, actually. Yeah. No, it's been really good, honestly. Like the again, that 3-action economy and the addition of everyone probably has a gun. If you don't, I suggest that you purchase one. They are very useful tools.
Our game assumes everyone has them.
Yeah, pretty much. Everyone's got a gun. So yeah, so basically like we are actually coming up with some new spells and class abilities that are just one action, but even the 2-action spells and class abilities, you can, cast your spell and then pew pew, you cast gun. And it's great because it adds, I feel like it adds to power level. Like it's something that you can do in addition to your main damage and ability vector, and it's fun and satisfying because you still get to roll your dice and hopefully you hit. But that's part of it. That's not everything. But that, and this being more of a our idea of this game is more of a ranged meta that also helps it casters and again people with guns, whether they are gun focused martial type characters or they are melee characters who also have the backup piece. Because again, get the gun, just have the gun.
Can you talk a little? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. My bad.
I was just gonna say, and this is something that like people who are in the Starfinder First Edition ecosystem and haven't like learned about 2e yet. you can cast like most spells on average are about 2 action casts, giving you that action left over. So there are certain combos you can do, like I cast a fireball and then I shoot my gun. But where it really comes into play and is really noticeable is like I use a buff or a debuff spell
Mm.
or an area control spell, something that's maybe not an attack roll. So when I use my gun, I'm firing my gun at full efficiency. And so that really promotes this play of like, I'm using my spells and then I'm shooting a gun, but it also creates interesting play dynamics at the table. One thing we've seen a lot of in our playtests, especially with the spellcasting classes, is there's this constant tug of war with the okay, I cast a spell, but then my third action that I have left over is now like left up to, do I move into a more advantageous position? Do I cast gun? Do I use one of these class abilities we've had that's, one action?
Pull
The
a grenade
mystic
out of my cheek pouches and
Yeah, do I
just
throw a
throw that
grenade and throw
sucker.
that? That's another thing you can cast as a spellcaster. Or one thing that we haven't even got into too much here, but it really impacts the meta. Do I take cover? Like
Mhm.
these are all big
Mhm.
decisions in the game.
Yeah, cover
Um,
I feel like is going to be something that people have to pay attention to. Like from the wargamer side,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
really get cover, and when you get into the role playing space, like half the people don't understand. You really want something between you and the thing shooting you.
Yeah,
Terrain is
definitely.
going to really matter a lot more in this
Yeah.
version of Starfinder. I'm just going to say that right now. We've seen it in our playtest. It is part of our like adventure design bible that we're working with. Like it is, terrain matters in this case, and how you use terrain.
So I mean, like we know that's not the case in first edition, which is basically a melee slog. So how do I mean it's true.
It wasn't
How
intended to be, but it
Yeah.
ended
Yeah, it
that
wasn't
way.
intended to be, but there were circumstances that made it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're part of the problem. That's what we
Yeah.
preach.
Or organized play made a whole generation of people who expected that maps would be 24 by 30. Thanks, flip maps. Like yeah, it happens.
I want to address something I just saw in chat about taking cover, eating up an action. So you already can get a benefit from cover sometimes, depending on how terrain is or other circumstances. It's just that the take cover is an action that will give you greater benefits.
Yes.
So there may be situations where you don't actually have to do it because you're already good, but if you want to full defense, like I'm just gonna really hunker down and get more, I'm gonna get more of that benefit, then yeah, you might want to take an action. But in some cases it probably won't be worth it because you have other
Yeah.
things you'd rather be doing.
And some of our classes inherently work with cover and have actions. Several
Yeah.
of our classes, in fact, have actions that directly work with cover. Like you do this thing and you take cover, or you can take cover and do this thing.
Oh,
That's
so
going to
like
be
as
part of
subordinate
this.
actions?
Hmm?
Like as
Yeah,
subordinate
like,
actions,
like
like
I
I do
mean,
the
you
thing and then I
yeah, you see this a lot in Pathfinder 2e design already. Like, your standard move is called a stride. It's one action. You move up to your speed. But like a class might have a one action ability it could do once per round to move to stride twice. We might have an action that's like, hey, you can fire your gun and immediately take cover for one
you
action.
gotta
That
call
might
it
be a thing. Yeah.
you'll make James and I'm really happy if you call it dolphin dive.
Um there's at least one thing that is in that vein. So yeah.
we
Modern
back
Warfare lobbies live.
back when we played Dead Sons, like when we played Dead Sons when it first came out, as the books were coming out, and our mechanic player would run or shoot and then just drop prone as a free action, and it became known as Butters' dolphin dive. It was very good. So I'm looking forward to that. Jenny, I want to cycle back to you because one thing you mentioned was that you wanted to create a ranged meta state. Can you talk a little bit about what your design philosophies are to try to get to that goal?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, having the assumption that everyone has a gun and will be able to get one is part of that, like having more ranged weapons options. Also, so like we are going to have classes that have melee options, but in general, a lot of our classes are more focused on ranged combat first, while we do have melee weapon availability. I can't talk. I could totally talk.
That's fine. I know that feel.
So part of it too is, like I said, like we're talking about doing more with bigger maps, like bigger spaces, which comes from adventure. If you're GMing your own homebrew stuff, that's going to kind of be on you. Although we hope that the flip mats and such we come out with will provide more options for that, for less all the time close quarters battles. So that's kind of the plan there too. Just also the fact that we're going to have species, or rather ancestries, that can fly from level 1, and some that can fly, with variant rules not long after level 1. I think that's going to help with the range state, meta state as well too, because when you have enemies and allies who just can fly or float around, you're going to have either really good mobility or a way to just shoot them down as well.
And there's a couple of 2E things that factor into this. Like in the 2E engine, no one gets attack of opportunity by default. So moving around and moving about is
unless you have
also,
a special class like the
yeah,
fighter,
unless you have certain
but,
abilities that grant it to you,
Yeah.
but no one by default has that, right? So that adds to that state. The other thing too is like something I want to address. I've seen a lot of people who have talked about like, oh, but the soldier in like first edition, you could do this like massive melee powerhouse, and it's like, yes, and maybe that was partly contributing to the problem of melee having this inherently like super strong situation where you could build this like death roller who was specifically made for melee, and then it took away from everything else. Whereas if we can better balance that out across the game and give people reasons to use guns, then suddenly the game doesn't become murder ball.
Yeah, it definitely feels like Starfinder 1 was designed to people wouldn't go melee, so they incentivized it, and they were like, oh, incentives. And then
I remember talking to Owen about this when the game came out, and John and I were having to do checks for OP and being like, this melee seems awful good, Owen. And Owen would tell. I remember it was a joke for John and I for a while. It was like in our playtest, the average player was like 30 to 60 feet apart when they were playtesting. And I'm like, oh, that will not work on an organized play table. That will never work on an organized play table. Again, you're sort of building for different situations. One thing that's good with our team, for example, is, we all have org play experience, so we know like flip maps and stuff are going to be super important to a subset of the game, but also we're building that game so like close quarters gunfighting feels really good and is very tactical and important. We've had like gunfights that have been one square apart, so
around the same pillar, just
yeah.
Well, I mean, that
over
makes
the
sense.
same log, like everyone's ducking behind a log, gets up, shoots, gets back down behind the log.
I mean, that makes sense too, because like that is part of the Star Wars fantasy. Like, how many of those fights are people in hallways shooting at each other from around corners? Like,
absolutely. But we also want to make sure that melee is part of the game, but it's not overshadowing. A great example of this that we saw a lot of effect with was the sort of close combat focused soldier build, because everyone's like, okay, so it's firing its AoE gun and it's doing a lot, but there's always, every time we ran a playtest, there was always that moment of surprise when the clawed beast got close to the soldier and the soldier was like, I use my reaction to stow gun and pull out Doshko. Like, Doshko is also very effective.
Yep.
Fun.
You just thought that was Obadiah's cane. No, that is Doshko.
Oh no, is she that old? I thought she was older.
She's putting on some years. That's why she switched to the gun.
So going back to the stream chat, a first time chatter Windermelon asks, how might spell traditions work or come back in the setting when it was originally established that magic had become universal and traditions had kind of died out in the setting?
So I think in some cases this is going to be something that we the team just felt like it was more important for us to have more magic. If we got one piece of feedback from first edition, it was that overwhelmingly people felt magic wasn't powerful enough and had like a good role in the setting. So you know what, like if that was like a belief that existed in a couple lines in a couple of books, I'll tell you most of our staff probably ignored that anyways, beyond the justification for the classes. Yeah, magic's a big thing in our setting. If anything, we're like in this edition, we want it to be magic and technology are on parity. And there are some things you can do with magic really well, some things you can do with tech really well.
That's fair. This question is for Jenny. Night Trace asks, with the move to 2E, will there be more separation between what a mech is and what a power armor is?
That is probably to be determined at this time. But
by Jen.
You know, we haven't even really started, much to my chagrin, we haven't really started the mech rules yet, but you know it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen because Thirsty, I know I see his face right now and he's like, yeah, she'll never shut up if we don't do it. And I won't. But I do think though that, yeah, I mean, it will not look the same as current mech combat, though there are obviously things I love about Starfinder First Edition mech combat. I mean, obviously, and there's lessons that I'm sure we'll take forward when we do start looking at that in the future. Like, we don't want this to totally change the combat state. We want this to feel like something that's part of the character and the rules you already have. I don't know what this unhinged background that there's.
It's the B movie.
I thought it was natural. I thought it was just
I just naturally.
Are we getting a B mech? Is that what's happening? Anyway,
for those listening, Thurston has gone from having the Starfinder logo as his background to having his room as his background to having the B movie as his background over the course of this interview. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have any other thoughts about that, Jenny? I interrupted you with my
no. That's pretty much it. It's just like right now, it's really too early to get into specifics of that. But yeah, they will. I mean, you know, I don't want to dig a hole there either. But we are not there yet. But there are definitely going to be differences in how we approach it. Just like everything with this.
But it certainly sounds like the fans of the mech system have a mech fan in you and can hope for something in the 7-year plan or however long it takes. How about Sebastian Kahydrin asks, in the current Starfinder, most guns have a melee weapon attached to them. Is there going to be similar like weapon modification rules in Starfinder 2nd Edition?
There's an upgrade slot that you might have noticed on weapons in the field test. There. That's my answer.
I see. James, would you like to ask a question while I skim through chat?
Sure. Any ideas about changing how laser weapons work as opposed to how they do in Starfinder First Edition?
I'm surprised you didn't.
You mean all those esoteric rules that nobody ever remembers, always forgets? A laser is like a gun that shoots fire damage. The end. It has a special weapon property. You know, yes, you can shoot it through smoke and other things. Like,
and it works against invisible things.
Yeah, that was just cruft we thought was too much and got rid of.
Oh,
nice.
You're
we also have magic, so like, meh.
Yeah.
I mean, lasers work through windows. I mean, there's glass on them.
Yeah.
You've immediately sold James on this edition with that one rule.
I've never seen
95% of people don't even get it until that one person brings it up and it destroys them.
Yeah, I know. I've been that person to tell people that, and then I've just been like, we're going to ignore this, but this might be a thing at a different table. Yeah. I even in organized play, I refused to run that because it wasn't fun.
Most people just don't get it. Like, yeah.
That's fair. So one thing I've noticed is that as we've been talking, it sounds like the terms species and ancestries have been used interchangeably. How is that going to work in the new edition?
It's going to be ancestries.
Yeah.
Like just for ease of reference across things. If we call it, like, I'm sure we'll refer to species in running text a lot, but for the mechanical term, we'll call them ancestries.
Kind of like what like creature is, maybe like species replaces creature, or is backwards compatibility creatures probably going to stay?
Well, I mean, creature will
have
a
text,
it has as a rules. It's a rules thing that exists, right? Species is a term we might use in running text a lot, like this species or da 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 da. But ancestry will remain the relevant rules title for it. Just because again, we want to make this compatibility work as well. Changing it just because species is a bit more thematic and such to our game, whilst fine, also creates a point of dissonance between the two that we just don't really need to have.
Milo3 has an interesting question in chat. The Pathfinder playtest had a separate logo for the playtest in the final game. Is this logo final, or do you think that logo might change?
To be determined.
Fair. Next one on the list. So far, setting question. The first question we've gotten that's not a mechanical question. We've heard that the pack worlds will have a planet explode, but is it definitely a planet? Could it perhaps be a moon or a planetoid? What if Nechak explodes? Won't someone think of the trucks?
Truck's pretty cool. Nechak's pretty cool. It'd be pretty cool. Something in the pack world's gonna explode. It's gonna be pretty cool.
Except for people on it.
You might find more about that closer to the playtest release.
Oh, so I mean,
in a way you can experience.
I mean, but Thirsty said it'll be pretty cool. So clearly, the Burning Mother is going to explode.
Yeah.
We're all screwed. Yeah.
Here's an interesting question. Obviously, OG Hell has resulted in many pieces of previously established lore needing to change to fit a canon that is divorced from Wizards of the Coast. Murder Hobo 6226 asks, will that affect the name for Formians?
So, if you've ever met Eric Mona and been in a meeting with him, you'll know that Eric has a library, a massive library. And I'll remember when we were going through some OGL stuff, and Eric was diligent enough to turn around, consult the archive, and pull out the decrepit, falling apart science fiction book he had at the time that specifically used the term Formians to describe ant-like creatures well before anything OGL related used it. We might need to check with a lawyer on that to make sure that's reasonable, but it's in our mind that Formians will probably stay. But we, for purposes of legality, we might have to change it, right? Like that is on the list of like a handful of items that Starfinder has, and by a handful I mean a very small number, of which currently it is mostly Formians and Drow.
Do you have any comments about Drow?
Stay tuned. I will address like a big elephant in the room that people are like, they're gonna blow up Apostate and get rid of Drow. No, I'm not taking the coward's way out. There, I've given you one answer. We're gonna deal with this head on, and we're not just gonna disappear Drow and what their role is in the setting. Will we have to have them be something different? Absolutely. Do we want to make sure that we can still live the dystopian, cyberpunky arms dealer manufacturer fantasies and
with
characters that
elves,
people want with your gothish elves? Absolutely, that's on the table with what we're doing.
Very nice. Let's see. How about another question? We did that one already. Got to cross that one off. Here's an interesting question. Are there plans for a setting name for the Pact World setting, similar to how the Pathfinder setting is now the Age of Lost Omens?
Starfinder.
Yeah, it's just Starfinder.
That's our brand.
Fair. Cool.
Yeah.
Let's see. What should we ask next? Do you have a preference, James?
There is a question about the Solarium, but that kind of follows into class questions, stuff under, still on.
You can toss it at me. What's the worst that happens? I say
worst
no.
happens no. Yep. From Mirror, field tests haven't said stuff. Yes.
I was just staring at you. Keep going.
I haven't said much about the Solarian, who has iconic abilities about cycling through duality, and it got increased. Any plans on keeping any of those, or throwing everything out, or what is the philosophy for a class that mostly had melee options?
Solarian is one of the classes that is probably the most different, I would say, Jenny, of classes we've experimented with. We went an entirely different direction while keeping flavor and how the class felt in first edition, but we really wanted to do something very different with it.
We don't want to lose it, because Solarian in a lot of ways is probably one of our most this is uniquely Starfinder classes that we have. And we don't want to lose that because it's not a Jedi and it's not like anything else, right? It is very uniquely Starfinder. So we keep the concept of it and the theming of it, but as Thirsty's saying, yes, we have a different take on how that works.
Are you
spoiling stuff?
I am. Look. I'm gonna. So the other question that inevitably comes with this is, will my armor Solarian feel good? Will my solar weapon Solarian feel good? Will I have a solar flare? Will that be an option for me? I don't know. Dora the Explorer, why not all three? There you go. Bam. Take that.
I mean, you kind of have that in first edition, but it takes forever to come online.
What if all three at first level? Next question.
All right, I think so. Like, it's funny
What
that
if
you
you don't
say
have to
that.
pick like all these and oh, do I have exact even like of this and that, or if I have over, is it gonna mess me up and give me a penalty? What if we just like got rid of that? I
Yeah,
don't know.
what if it was a binary system like the classes? Pretty cool. All I'm gonna say is Solarian has me really excited. It's also a class I
Yeah.
designed, so I have a lot of
That's why you're excited.
I have a lot of love for it right now.
Speaking of classes you designed, I believe several years ago we had you on the show talking about a class you designed, the precog. And
Yeah.
as we know, the precog is returning in
Mhm.
Starfinder core rulebook second edition, but in a different capacity, right?
Yeah, it's going to be one of the different anomalies where
Paradoxes that
paradoxes for
Witchworker has.
the Witch Warper. Yeah.
Very cool. So are other classes getting merged into other classes into each other as like one of like a mandala of class design on the table, or is it really just the precog?
We're looking at that. There's like there are strong situations where that could work. One thing which we have not done, but we talked about the Vanguard as another example of that. Like, did the Vanguard work better as an aspect of the Solarian and just collapsing some of that in on the Solarian? There were heavy talks about that. The precog into the Witch Warper was something I pushed for as the person who made the precog, because they just generally felt like they were treading a lot of similar territory, and there were
Yeah.
different mechanical expressions for them, certainly. But one of the things we really want to do in Starfinder 2e is have these classes be very focused on what they're doing and have like a niche that they are exploring, but we don't want to be hyper focused, but we also don't want to be generalists. That's also why, for example, you're not going to see soldier is doing everything. You're not going to see an operative that's doing everything. We want to make sure that classes have defined roles so that when you're taking them, you're getting some perks and some drawbacks. One of the issues we ran into in SF1 design was like there were a lot of classes out there that had a melee build, had a gun build, had a this build, and then when it came time to start adding stuff to the class, you were accounting for all of these variables. We want to make sure that our classes have a focus in what they're doing and what their play style is that we can expand on. And so when we were looking at like precog versus witch warper, it made sense when we were talking about introducing paradoxes into a witch warper. Like, well, what kind of things would make sense here? And precog just came up as absolutely we should do that.
Definitely. James, do you want to take those two questions in chat?
Well, I saw one that caught my attention about
Do it.
4 arms or more breaking combat. Have you found that to be a problem? That was from Dabber Raccoon.
There's a new rule for that in the field test, right?
Sorry, what was it? Breaking
For
combat?
4 arms, if you having more than 2 arms, basically, if that will affect combat action.
Yeah. I mean, it does impact the design space of the game. For example, I'll use something we're in the midst of mucking about with internally. Missiles. We want to make sure that missiles feel like when you slap a missile into a missile launcher and fire it, it's a one big shot, probably is pretty impactful, is pretty cool to use. But to mitigate some of that, we have to make sure that like there's a reload cost. There's like a bulk and heft thing. If whilst everyone will be like, oh, but it's such a funny image. The Skittermander with 3 missile launchers that he can fire bang, bang, bang. That's cool, but like we have to balance against that for a game perspective, right? So that's why the field test has some exploration of rules. And as a lot of people have rightly guessed, like that's something we can improve on. Is the Skittermander who can like hold 3 missile launchers and fire them like nobody's business, appropriate for like a 15th level character or whatever? Yeah, probably. But is it like something we want to open the door on at first level? Probably not. So that's why we're exploring some of the.
You got to be at least Stitch from Lilo and Stitch before you can do 3 missile launchers. I feel that. Another question we had in chat, it's actually funny because your example of the missiles answered a Night Trace question because they wanted to know whether there were going to be more explosives in Starfinder second edition.
Yes.
Very good. There was a discussion on the forums about, that's I already read that one. Someone wants it's funny because this is really a Jessica question, but it might be a Thirsty and Jenny question too, given your backgrounds. Any chance that there will be more Trials of the Perplexity in second edition, or will that end with first edition?
That's
TBD.
all thirsty.
It's my baby.
Maybe.
I want to do. I certainly want to do things with the Perplexity. One of the fun things about being creative director now is I can like do whatever I want in the setting, and it's true.
I mean, there are some weird things I put in that outline that I'm working on right now about the Perplexity and some other things like that. So
this is Jenny outlining stuff and putting in like little seeds, knowing I will have to approve that outline, and then in the comments back when I'm like, change this, assign this to me, change this, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So earlier you had talked about the playtest and like not wanting to reprint things, because obviously like just go check out Archives of Nethys. It's free. I will shill for that site all day, every day. Made my life great. When we're talking about the final product, where do you see it? Like, I mean, I imagine you're probably gonna have to reprint like Human, Ysoki, Android, but like what do you think the current design philosophy on that type of like reprinting existing content in second edition is going to be?
Well, I think again the core rules will stand alone, right? Like, and the core rules are going to have core ancestries, and there are core ancestries that we need to hit. Human is going to exist. Will there be some overlap with PF2 humans? Absolutely. But if we were to say do like the gap displaced heritage, that would be something entirely new. Ysoki is another good example. Like Ysoki heritages are often like specifically terrain based. Like a good, rat folk example from PF2 is there's like a sewer Ysoki heritage that probably doesn't work as well in Starfinder, but hey, we can
Not
put
as
in some
relevant.
new stuff. One of my goals with Ancestry specifically was when we were designing the ones that are going to go into the core rulebook, of which we've not seen all of them. Those ancestries have some things that are different. Like, we're not just universally reprinting everything, that's for sure. So
very cool. That I'm sure that'll make lots of people excited to hear. So one thing that I thought I really liked in the field test was the commercial tactical advanced tags on weapons, looking kind of like they function in a similar capacity to weapon property runes. Is that kind of where the design space is on that? And if that's the case, are you planning to have like a separate entry on the table for each one like it currently is in the field test? I can only speak for myself, but I know for me it drives me crazy when there's like 8 pages of weapons and most of them are the same weapon over and over again.
Or
Oh,
just
I know.
random, you can get this random kind of weapon at like item level 8, but then you'll never find another one like it ever again.
Yeah. You feel
I
me,
know.
Jenny.
I also know from your last episode, because I watched it, that James was actually okay with the tables and was like, huh, that's pretty cool. And I'll tell you, we are going to have a bunch of tables in our books. That's something that we are going to have, because first of all, science fantasy fiction gamers love big reward tables that they can
And
look
guns.
at.
We love
And guns.
guns.
Now, of course, doing what we call the C-Tase upscaling, that's the commercial and then tactical advanced, blah, blah, blah. Doing that scaling means we can do a couple of things, right? First of all, yes, the property and striking runes, there is that math that we've kind of built in. So you'll have 7 variants of a gun, and then the first one gives you your +1 to hit in your tracking bonus. The next one gives you an increased damage. What that also lets us do, though, is in these different versions of guns, maybe the like advanced version just gets 20 more feet on the range, or the magazine and stuff is different, and like you're using more or less ammo, or it has a bigger capacity to it. Now, a lot of people will go, oh yes, but then at that point you're filling up a lot of table space. Gonna zoom back out of that, and I'm going to address another issue that is probably one of the biggest things, and I know was one of your personal bugbears, Alex, as someone who studies you, is the idea in Starfinder first edition, you couldn't upgrade weapons. You were tossing them into a wood chipper. So unless we have a way to create a baseline of upgrading weapons, it's really difficult for us to do that in a coherent way. Now, by doing this 7 sort of rank scaling, for any gun we do, we can I will call this like any not category, but like any family of guns, like the laser pistol. If you have a laser pistol now, you have a scaling. So if we wanted to say, and we will, include a rule that allows you to upgrade Granny's pistol throughout the entirety of the campaign, you can now do that and not have to throw it into a wood chipper. And that is very important to us. Now, what this also lets us do, and I'm very excited by this opportunity, is maybe that table doesn't have 7 entries. Maybe it has 9 entries. And maybe there's a 3rd level pistol that doesn't have the striking rune, but does more damage. And maybe that's like an Erebani arm specific pistol that doesn't have that upgrade scaling, but is kind of a unique thing. And then in future books, we can then do a whole bunch because we want this thing to be scalable. What we're talking about right now is a core rule book, like a core assumption, and what the core elements of the gameplay are. From there, we can just do a book that's like, oh yeah, like here's tables galore, and we don't have to do CTAs up for everything. And it's just like, I don't know, here's the Erebani laser pistol that hurts more. Like we can do those kind of things. But what we're looking at right now is the baseline.
That was a good answer. You have me convinced.
Yeah, I like the part where you talked about tables. I started playing BattleTech, so all I see is tables.
I've been playing BattleTech lately too, so don't worry, I'm with you. I love tables. I think they're great, and I think GMs love flipping through them. And we've been getting artwork of a bunch of guns and fun stuff that we're gonna have. And our we work really closely with our art team, like Sonia Morris, our art director, Ken Hamilton, our concept artist, and Kyle Hunter, who's been doing a lot of the art layout and stuff. We're gonna make sure that these books look slick.
So, I mean, you did such a good job of addressing my concern with that one. So I'm going to go and bring over my friend Obazaya. And I know that you've been studying all of my behavioral patterns and ticks, Thirsty. So for me on the soldier, the big thing is that the way that it's currently presented, and obviously you've already mentioned that things have changed in the field test that we haven't seen yet. Can you talk a little bit about the design philosophy for the soldier and like the balance between we want to make this cool class that has like this specific fantasy and heavy weapons, and also like, but we want to make sure that you could play your character from 1st edition?
All right, I'm gonna burst a bubble here. In no point have we said you can play your character from 1st edition. And I'm gonna throw this out there because that's not the goal of a new edition of the game. You have 2 years to finish up your current campaigns. We're introducing a new game. Can you play a lot of the fantasies associated with characters? Absolutely, but like we have not like gone out and said like, oh yeah, you're going to be able to port your characters over from 1st edition. That's just not tenable. Like we have 200 plus ancestries and a whole bunch of other things. We're taking some of these classes into wild and crazy new places that maybe your old builds don't follow. So when we talk about this, like, the soldier's something new, and can it still fulfill a lot of those power fantasies like Obozaya? Absolutely. Obozaya is still very keen with the Doshko, but going back to where we started this conversation, there's a meta discussion to be had here about changing some of the meta of the game. And so we needed to make adjustments to that so that we didn't have just here is Melee King the class. Like that's not what we're looking for right now in the game.
Yeah, we also just had more like thematic, like we've had a lot of talks about like what's our concept for, the new version, like the 2nd edition version of all these classes. And like the soldier, we obviously do want to we have some melee functionality because of that feat that Thirsty referenced earlier with a reaction. You can you get your Doshko out or whatever big old melee weapon you have when enemies are actually getting in your face into close quarters. But we see the soldier as being more of like the heavy, like the gunner who's kind of on the front lines, maybe kind of a tank, sort of that sort of character, in big armor, big guns, tough. And we see the operative as more of like a military operator, set of skills type person who, we kind of tried to tease out what is the fantasy that we want to. Sorry, I'm gonna get in trouble
but not
here.
the skill monkey. That's the envoy
No,
and that's a very clear change we've
yes
made.
And when I say set of skills, I mean set of skills to kill you. That's what I mean, not like set of skills to be good at science and shit. That's not what I meant. So good clarification, Thirsty.
Well, we typically end this show at 10 o'clock Eastern time. That's 1 minute. And James and I have asked you both tons of questions. So do you two, Jenny and or Thirsty, have a question you want to ask anyone in the audience? You can ask me or James. You could ask your fans at large. What would or maybe you could answer a question that we didn't ask that you wanted to really share a piece of information about. I'm going to turn it to you two.
Jenny, you first.
Oh, I'm on the spot. No.
Delegation.
Oh, that's horrible. That's
well,
horrible.
I mean, I listened to your Stranger Fellows podcast, and when you did that, they all picked all of yours in a row. And then
It's
you
true.
were left like,
true, but
no.
I don't think Jenny's gonna pick mine in this instance. So I'm banking.
Oh, he's got one, and he's still delegating.
Mhm.
Wow. I mean, I don't know. All I'd want to share. I don't think I have a question. I've been kind of following along with chat as much as I can, and I think y'all are sussing out a lot of stuff that we're planning. Some things we can't confirm because again they might change. But I mean, we are certainly thinking about a lot of these things that I see discussed everywhere. We do care. I just also want to emphasize that like we really do love. Like I might say things about it was annoying to have to sell your gun for only like 10% of its value, or you could only find this one really cool gun at one random level. But I love Starfinder 1. I played it for years. I wrote for it for years. I worked on it on staff. It's great and you can still play it, and it's going to be the only Starfinder in town really still for another like 2 years. But even after that, the nanites will not come. Like we're not releasing them. I promise yet. Anyway, so you can still play Starfinder 1 and we love it, but there are things that we just really see opportunities to bring it forward, and that is what we are looking to do. So thanks for caring about the game, honestly, is all I want to say. Anyway, Thirsty.
See, and here I am wanting to be like, Alex was a coward and didn't ask me the first question on his list, which I was just like,
the first question on my list.
Yeah, the first question on your list.
Initial
was like,
reception.
I was like, oh, you're setting a tone with this question, and then you never asked it. And I'm like sitting here like, I have an answer prepped and everything, Alex.
Then I will ask the question for you. Yeah. I wrote that initial reception to Starfinder Second Edition seemed popular among Pathfinder 2 players and mixed among Starfinder First Edition players. What would you say to Starfinder First Edition fans who feel that the creative team is abandoning them for greener pastures, which is something I've seen on quite a few places?
Yeah. Okay, so there's a couple little things in that to dissect, and I want to start off by this addressing the fact from your previous show as well about, oh hey, it sure sounds like this is geared towards like Pathfinder 2 players and not Starfinder 1 players. And the truth of the matter, and I want to build off of Jenny's point, this is what led me to this, is that yeah, that is the case. We are actually gearing a lot of our push on this to people who aren't playing our game right now, because it would be really presumptive of me to start telling Starfinder 1E players to stop playing a game when we have 3 more hardback books coming out for this line that me, Jenny, Dustin, who worked on Enhanced, Joe and John put a ton of effort into, and they're honestly some of the best books the line has ever had. It would be incredibly presumptive for us to immediately go, but this new thing is coming, so pay all of your attention here. Really, our focus is on getting new people interested in the brand. We want to grow the brand because we also need to address concerns that a lot of our long-standing fans have had, which is, Fat Tony from The Simpsons. Thurston, when are we going to get more books? Where are the new books? When are the new books? Well, and so on and so forth. We have to, make an announcement, but to cater it towards 1E fans would just be disingenuous to them and just like not even fair when we have a whole year of great releases coming out for 1E. And then we have tons of time to evangelize, all the perks and great things about the new edition. Trust me, we're going to be doing that anyways, but we don't need to direct it at them. As far as like abandoning that audience for greener pastures, I'm going to say like, we are wanting to make the game better and have better pastures for everyone to come to. Like, if One was the commercial success story that it needed to be to keep the edition going, we obviously would have kept going with it at a regular pace. But it's very clear that demographics are changing, game markets are changing, how people play games are changing, and we need to move with the times, or rather than like one or two books, you're going to have no books eventually. And we need to stay ahead of that, right? So I want to say, like, on the hand of people who feel like they're abandoning us, that's not the case at all. We just have stuff coming out for you, and we don't want to like be telling you to go do something else when we also have cool stuff coming out for you. And also, it's 2 years away before this even really kicks off, right? Like, breathe. The sky's not falling. You have tons of books. I still have 1E campaigns and games going on. It's all good. It's all good. As for, another cool thing that you should go check out, if you're interested, at some point in the future, maybe our team will do some live stream game of 2E and showcase some of that for y'all, because we've been talking about doing that, and I think that'll be something you want to, my question would be, would you be interested in seeing some of that from Paizo? Because I think it'd be pretty cool.
I think there's definitely an Oblivion Oath / Band of Bravo sides hole that people could use some fill-in with. So I'd be into that.
Yeah.
Let's end on a positive note. What's one thing enhanced that you're really excited for that you can tell people about?
Alternate
get to go
uses
first
for
this
resolve
time.
points.
Oh, from enhanced?
Yeah,
Yeah.
alternate
So-
uses for resolve points, 100%.
Good
Like,
one.
that is absolutely just the coolest thing in that book. I've had so many campaigns where people forget resolve points exist until they go unconscious. Trust me, they're going to be gambaing a lot with this system. That's all
Did you
I'm
want to
saying.
add one too, Jenny?
Yeah, I didn't work too much on enhanced, but from what I've kind of seen and heard, I'm definitely excited about like the additional the class options, like stuff for biohacker and witch warper. I think is going to be really cool in particular. That'll make those classes like just kind of give them a little extra oomph and give them some more stuff they can do.
Well, I want to take the time to thank both of you for coming. It's just about time for us to wrap up. So just a quick little bit wrap up and a shout out like we usually do. If you are a fan of the first edition Starfinder core rulebook, Owen has a mega bundle going on right now. Owen is currently fighting cancer and is attempting to raise money for his treatment. The bundle is available on the Open Gaming store. So if you have the money for the bundle, I think it's $39, $39.99. I definitely recommend checking that out. That is my one shout out. James, do you have a shout out you want to make?
No.
Cool. Jenny or Thurston, do you have a shout out you'd like to make?
StarfinderPlaytest.com.
Yeah, starfinderplaytest.com and
Oh.
check out Paizo on twitch.tv for in the future if we do some of those streams or recorded play videos.
You can also
cool.
see me on Narrative Declaration. I do some jamming there. Plug.
That's awesome.
Mandatory.
And if you want to see more of us, you can go to nodirectionpodcast.com. There is a link to our awesome Discord channel where you can follow along and chat with us and do all sorts of fun things and meet gamers and stuff. We have most of the questions that we asked tonight were sourced from No Direction fans. So it's very good way to chat with me and James, keep us knowing what's going on and what's new and good and whatnot. The other thing, I like to end each show talking a little bit about what our next episode is going to be. James, I think we settled on Ports of Call, right? Because we never
Yeah.
got to do that before John had to take a leave. So we're going to look at Ports of Call, and then I think after that, November, I'm pretty sure that Enhanced will be out by November. So I'd like to do Enhanced in November. And then
Yeah.
hopefully in December, there will be at least one more field test document we can look at. So like we got like a nice little lineup. We got stuff going.
Early
really good.
October.
Oh.
We
Did you
already
just get-
we announced it on Paizo Live, so it's not actually a spoiler.
Oh.
Early October for our next field test.
Can you spoil what it is?
Sure
Okay.
won't.
That's fair.
Sure won't.
Can you blame a host?
I'll
for
be in a
trying?
cabin in the woods when it gets released too. I'm very excited for that. It literally coincides with the vacation my partner and I have where I will be in a cabin in the woods.
Very good. Well, I hope you take a much needed rest. Obviously, making a game and doing all the shifts that you guys are doing, it takes a lot of energy. So Keep it up. And also, don't stick around in a cabin in the woods yourself, all of our listeners. Instead, you should go beyond with No Direction.